The dust of the ranch roads swirled in the summer air as 22-year-old Caleb McGraw leaned on his shovel, sweat dripping from his brow, the weight of a poor man's life heavy on his young shoulders. He was the son of a failed rancher, left with nothing but a small shack, a patch of dry land, and debts that seemed to multiply with each passing season. The townsfolk pitied him, but no one offered help, not until the local banker and his influential circle cooked up a plan to erase his debt in exchange for something Caleb never imagined. He was told he must marry Eleanor Whitfield, a widowed woman nearly twice his age, daughter of a wealthy cattle baron and owner of sprawling acres Caleb could only dream of. The town whispered behind his back, mocking the idea that a strong, handsome young cowboy would be tied to a woman who could have been his mother. But Caleb had no choice. Either accept the marriage or watch his land and home vanish under foreclosure. With fists clenched and heart heavy, he stood at the altar before Eleanor, a woman in her 40s with streaks of silver in her hair and a regal posture that spoke of money and influence. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, held his gaze not with pity, but with an unspoken understanding of his pain. Their wedding was not a celebration of love, but a transaction sealed by law and gossip. Caleb felt the shame of it, convinced he was just a pawn in her life, a poor boy tethered to a woman of wealth who would never truly care for him. The first weeks of their marriage were cold. Caleb avoided her eyes, burying himself in endless ranch work, while Eleanor watched quietly, her dignity intact, never scolding, never demanding. It was in the silence of their new life together that Caleb began to notice things. How Eleanor would rise early and walk the land with him, how she understood cattle better than most men, how she carried herself with grace, even when townsfolk sneered at her choice of husband. One evening, after a long day of branding cattle, Caleb sat on the porch exhausted, expecting loneliness as usual. But Eleanor stepped outside with a pot of stew she had cooked herself, something no wealthy widow was expected to do. "Eat," she said softly, setting it before him. He looked at her surprised, and for the first time saw not her age, not her reputation, but a woman who was strong, capable, and perhaps just as lonely as he was. Over time, their conversations grew. She shared stories of her late husband, of how she once dreamed of freedom beyond her father's wealth. And Caleb, in turn, shared his fears of failure and his wish to make something of himself. Slowly, the ranch began to flourish, not because of Eleanor's money, but because of her wisdom and Caleb's hard work. What began as forced duty started to feel like a partnership, and in the quiet moments, when Eleanor laughed softly at his clumsy jokes or when her hand brushed against his as they worked side by side, Caleb began to wonder if fate had given him something more than just survival. He had been forced into this marriage, but perhaps it wasn't a curse. After all, perhaps it was the beginning of a story he never expected. By the first autumn after their marriage, the ranch had transformed. What was once barren and hopeless now thrived with healthy cattle, golden fields, and a new kind of life that pulsed through every inch of land. Caleb worked harder than ever, but he was no longer working for mere survival. He was building a future with a woman he had come to admire deeply. Townsfolk, once full of mockery, began to watch in awe as the odd couple defied every expectation. Eleanor wasn't just a wealthy widow. She was a leader, a strategist, and most of all, a partner who respected Caleb as a man, not as a boy trapped in circumstance. But what surprised Caleb most was the way she believed in him. Whenever his doubts crept in, Eleanor's steady voice anchored him. "Caleb, you were born to be more than what they think of you." Those words lit a fire in him that no ridicule could extinguish. One stormy night, when heavy rains threatened to wash away their herds, Caleb rushed into the fields with nothing but lantern light, ready to fight for everything they had built. Eleanor followed, drenched in rain, her elegant dress clinging to her as she helped him drive the cattle to safety. Side by side, they battled the storm. And in that moment, Caleb realized he was not alone. He had a woman who stood with him, a woman who carried burdens as fiercely as he did. That night, when the rain subsided and they collapsed in the barn, Caleb looked at Eleanor differently. He saw the lines on her face not as signs of age, but as proof of a life lived with courage. He touched her hand and she did not pull away. Love, unexpected and unspoken, had crept into their lives. By spring, Caleb was no longer the poor boy mocked by townsfolk. He was the proud master of a thriving ranch, and Eleanor, once viewed as merely a wealthy widow, was the heart of it all. Together, they built more than wealth. They built respect, love, and a legacy that people whispered about for generations. Caleb often thought back to the day he was forced to marry her, how broken and ashamed he had felt, and he realized now that life had given him not chains but freedom. She gave him wisdom, partnership, dignity, and a love deeper than any he could have dreamed. Sometimes life doesn't give us what we want, but what we truly need. And as Caleb stood at the edge of his ranch, hand in hand with the woman who had changed his life forever, he whispered a silent thank you to fate for leading him here. Friends, if this story touched your heart and made you believe that love can bloom in the most unexpected ways, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have many more powerful stories of struggle, love, and triumph waiting for you. And by subscribing, you'll never miss the next journey into the untold tales of the West.